Hey everyone, welcome. You are listening and watching simultaneously or consecutively on Silicon Curtain and Rashkin Report, another episode of The Russian Threat. As I humbly call this podcast, my name is Yuri Rashkin. I am here in Wisconsin, in the United States, and I am joined always by Jonathan Fink, who is out there across a great, big, beautiful ocean somewhere out in the Netherlands of Europe.
That's it.
Welcome. How's it going, man?
It's good. I mean, I'm slightly closer to what they call the pointy end, but at least we have a little, sea surrounding us. I don't think, Russians and boats go too well together. So whatever happens, we're probably okay.
So tell me, as we're looking at this week that is passing us by at a stupendous pace, and I don't know if I wanted to slow down or pass by faster, we have this United Nations General Assembly. In the Russian language space, which is where I kind of live most days, is it's a big deal. And the speech by President Trump and not so much by President Zelensky, interestingly enough, which I thought was very notable for its kind of showing off strength, which is something I've been just on Ukrainians for months now. I've been saying, forget all this democracy stuff. You're talking to the wrong administration. You forget about human rights, talk about strength, how you are just bending Russia to your will. And I think it's working. But
Yes,
I
and
wonder,
flattery
yeah.
of the orange guy. I mean, there's quite a lot of that in there, and actually, that works too.
Totally. It's sad to admit it because he's also president of the United States. But how do you feel at the pointy end after his speech? Do you feel like America is getting further and further away? And what does the world look like without it?
I think it's interesting because there are several ways to read this. I mean, first of all, I think we have to be thankful that you know, there seems to be a narrative flip or a narrative change, and people say, "Ah, but he flip flops completely all the time." There are three absolutely fundamental changes in his narrative tone here, and I think it's interesting to understand how that's come about. Who has injected these messages into him? Is it just that he's spoken to Zelensky? I suspect not. I don't think a conversation with Zelensky in the UN would have been enough to flip these three narratives. One of those narratives is Russia is weak. Russia is weak and Russia is poor. Those are new in Donald Trump's vocabulary. And this is the fundamental change in mindset. And actually, I have to say that actually there's a commonality here between Trump and Biden. Whereas Biden was all about, democracy and the values you talked about, there was still the perception that Russia is strong. You cannot beat Russia. So, if you can survive, then
I
that's
mean,
great.
that
We'll
was
help you
that
to
was
survive.
Trump's point of view in February. He
That
had,
was Trump's point of view. It was also underlying, the Biden Sullivan doctrine, quite frankly. It was do not escalate too much because Russia's really scary, right? And Russia's all these things which it projects onto you. So this is a fundamental shift in Trump's language. It's interesting. If Russia is poor and weak, then by implication, there may be nothing that Trump can benefit from. Russia has nothing to offer if it's poor and weak. And that's kind of interesting. The other one,
explain this to me. How can Russia be so weak if Putin is so beautiful and strong?
well, I don't know if the romance, I don't know if the bromance is over. I don't know if that's,
Right.
done
Okay.
and
Back
dusted
to your
yet.
3 points. All
But
right.
but Russia itself has nothing to offer. And by extension, and in Trump's world as well, Russia is not independent of Putin, and Putin is not independent of Russia. So if Russia is weak, then by extension, that Putin also is weak, and that's not good. It means the reflexive control is easing and weakening, which is going to create some paranoia in the Kremlin. The second narrative, of course, is that Ukraine is brave, that Ukraine can win back all of its sovereign territories. Now, this has gone further than, and going to upset, my Democratic friends here. That's gone further than anything we heard from Biden Sullivan. If you go back to the record, never once was it suggested, even though obviously in material support, Biden did a lot more than Trump and actually gave a lot more permissions eventually to use those weapons. Never once was it articulated that Ukraine could win and that Ukraine should win, and that it would be able to take back its sovereign territories, including Crimea. We haven't heard most European leaders go that far. So this is an extraordinary and interesting change of narrative tone. The third one, I think, is one of the most significant as well, is that Russia is the aggressor. Russia started it. Russia's the aggressor. Russia is wrong. All three of these narratives are present in what he said, and I think that's interesting. People are going to say all sorts of things about what Trump will or won't do. I don't think these narrative shifts tell us anything about the policy he's going to adopt. It tells us nothing about whether he's going to take on sanctions or not. It tells us nothing about what kind of weapon systems he's going to sell. Because let's face it, one thing that's consistent: there is no aid coming. But if he's prepared to sell these weapon systems and lift restrictions on them, that is something, especially the long-range weapons. So there's nothing in here tangible about what is going to happen around primary and secondary sanctions and around what weapon systems may or may not be adopted. But I think that's the best we can hope for. That is absolutely the best we can hope for, is that sanctions loopholes are closed and that the US is prepared to sell the appropriate weapons to Europe and not place restrictions on them. That's always the best I think we were going to hope for with Trump. So this perhaps could be the best outcome.
The best Trump of both worlds. Look, I think that I'm always interested when people say three things, but I'm going to argue here because I think that Russia weak and Ukraine is strong is almost one thing to me, although it is two sides of the same coin with really interesting implications. You're right, because if Putin is weak, oh, could Russia be really, holding on this whole authoritarian dictatorship, strong control? Is it really there? Especially people are standing in lines to get gas. It's hard to even, I would imagine, put them in jail if you can't, if the car doesn't have gas to run to get them to jail. So maybe this, regime is going to be relying more on donkeys and horses and camels. Entirely possible. And I'm really fascinated by this something you hit on, which is that there's a Biden-Sullivan doctrine of strong Russia. So then whose doctrine would it be, this new and improved doctrine of weak Russia and strong Ukraine? Is it Zelensky is the author of this narrative, or where is this coming? Because it's not Marco Rubio, neither Marco Rubio's Secretary of State or Marco Rubio, the national,
No, no,
advisor.
no.
No,
No,
it's
Marco did
where's
not
this
suddenly
coming
grow a
from?
pair and start, talking truth to power. No, there's no chance. Even someone like Lindsey Graham, I think, is craven in the presence of Trump. I doubt if it's come from him either. But somebody has broken through. Somebody has broken through the sort of congealed, scabby crust of MAGA advisors and injected some good sort of liquid custody information into that sort of, beneath that crust. So
I
this
guess
is
that explains Trump's ankles.
this is this is interesting, but of course there are other things to consider here. Now, what would it take to influence Trump? It's not moral virtue. Of course, you've mentioned that strength absolutely plays a role. But there could be several other things that perhaps have been suggested to him via national security briefings, via new information, and via information from the Ukrainians about operations they're about to mount. Typically they don't tell their allies anymore about those because it tends to spoil the party somewhat, or someone will say no. We know that from the Kursk operation and Spiderweb. But it may well be that Ukraine, and we actually have some signals to this, have gone and said, look, this is an operation we're going to mount. These are the weapon systems we need. This is what we can do with them. And this is why it will bring Russia to defeat. That could be fascinating, real information and real briefings. Trump also could be realizing, or someone could whisper in his ear, dude, you don't want to be associated with a loser. Russia could be far closer to losing this war than anyone expects. And I don't think Trump wants to tie his name in with a catastrophe. It may also have been pointed out to him that Russia now is little more than a proxy for China. And indeed, China, whereas it's been sort of trying to plausibly deny its involvement and play the role publicly of a sort of peacekeeper and arbiter, Chinese ship has been docking, a freighter has been docking in the port of Sevastopol multiple times. We don't know what it's been dropping off, but China's support for Russia is far more overt than it was before, and it perhaps has been made clear to Trump that the only thing keeping Putin in the game, keeping his war going, is the tacit and direct support of China. That would probably doubly upset him. If it's making China stronger, that then starts to matter less whether Putin is weak or not.
All right. A couple of things that I can come back at that with. First of all, Tulsi Gabbard, it was announced in New York Times, and Gabbard ends intelligence report on future threats to U.S. So we're not having better intelligence, we're going to have less intelligence. Why? Because some issues in the documents, which is issued every 4 years, had become politically inconvenient, Russia, former officials said. So we have this kind of situation. So that's our intelligence now, if I dare to call it that. And then the other thing is that Russia is now helping China to prepare for a potential invasion of Taiwan. Uh,
Yes, I read that just before we came on air with
right. So I
landing
mean,
craft and yeah.
what's happening? And of course we know that Pete Hegseth gathered everybody. My guess is that it's just to sign a non-disclosure statement, like Trump does with his ex-wives. But it's not going to save the world.
Well, Ben
Um,
Hodges, General Ben Hodges this afternoon posted on Twitter a historical analogy to that. 1935, Germany, all the admirals, all the majors, everybody, generals were called in similarly from all over the world. Although obviously Germany's reach was less than the US's, and it was explicitly so they could restate their oaths, but restate their oath to Hitler, not to the Constitution, and not to Weimar and all the rest. And interesting that Ben Hodges should post that and make a direct correlation with what Hegseth is doing
Well,
here.
this administration is reading, not just reading Mein Kampf, it's like learning the lessons and trying to follow timeline, but like much faster. This is the other thing that people are being critical of Trump for, is that his part of his ineptness is he's going too fast. But maybe because he thinks that there is no America out there that's going to stop him, so he can just do whatever. Because that what you're describing, there's also a comparison between Horst Vossel, I believe, and the
Yes.
murder of Charlie Kirk, and
And
how
Miller's fabulous, extraordinary rendition of a Goebbels speech at Charlie Kirk's memorial.
right, absolutely. Stephen Miller has outdone himself in that impersonation. Absolutely, I think everybody noticed, and paying him his dues. But nonetheless, he remains extremely influential person in this administration. So I guess just to bring this back to what you were talking about the Trump's tweet and the consequences of it, and that yes, Russia is weak, right? Ukraine is strong and Russia is aggressor. I don't know that for Trump that's even a minus. That's more of a just kind of a description, like in chess, white figures start first.
Oh, he sees
So
it as initiative, and
yes,
as
exactly.
go
That's
back
the go
previous
getter,
years. Yeah,
go
okay,
getter.
they
Yes,
went for it, right? Yeah, I like that.
you can
You
do
got to
things when you're
condemn
a
it,
big
but you got to
star.
admire it. There's one more point from that, which I think is the interesting one, because everyone says like, "Oh, great, Trump's narrative is back on side." Well, the narrative is important, but if it's not followed by action, then it becomes less important. If he's going to flip flop on it, as has been done before, oscillate between it. But I think the key thing comes at the end, and it is the suggestion of, well, good luck, guys. Right, you've got this. Right, Russia's weak, Ukraine's strong. You've got this. I think there's also implicit in that message. Yeah, we'll sell you weapons, but we're out. We're out, and you're on your own.
What I see in this is what I would call Trump's seventh bankruptcy. Because he filed bankruptcy 6 times in the past for different casinos and other things. Because you have to be a genius to do that. But anyway, because he does it a certain way where he has to explain that he is smart for getting out. This is not my problem. This hotel was ridden with, the walls already. As this has come to my attention, this hotel building is in a terrible shape, which I was not didn't know before. So I'm washing my hands of it. I'm out of here, and it's now their responsibility. Blame Joe Biden. Goodbye.
Yes.
And it's, so that's what he does when he can't fix it.
There's an
And
element to that, isn't it? Not my war. I didn't start it, but good luck, everybody. I'm done.
good luck, everybody. That is so true. But is first of all, is it reasonable to say that no matter what Trump wants, this is his war? Because
Well,
that
yeah.
he can bail, but that's his decision in his war to bail.
To give him his due on this, I mean, first of all, he doesn't recognize that Ukraine was already at war with Russia and Donbass during his first administration. But that's, that we'll let that one pass.
That's the
Um,
fault of that other 45
yeah,
president. Who cares? Right.
to give him his due, and I don't think he really sort of understands or has the background or context on this. To an extent, the full-scale invasion of Ukraine can be laid more at the door of Barack Obama and Joe Biden than anybody else. And I'll explain that point. Um, Barack Obama, for all his extraordinary positives, and leadership and rhetoric and undoubted, attraction of his character, um, no red lines were enforced. No red lines that were clearly articulated and explicitly articulated. None of them were followed through, which gave Russia complete impunity to go to the next red line and the next and the next. We had chemical
But
weapons, we had
to be
Syria, we had
to
this,
be
we had
fair,
that.
this is just a continuation of
It's a
weak
continuum.
American policy.
And it's followed through with each one, but that weakness really was deeply entrenched there. But then it was carried through in subsequent administrations, and you're absolutely correct
Yeah,
there.
but why not?
And
I mean, yes, I like Barack Obama, but
yeah,
yes, I'm willing to admit that things did not go as planned when he was president.
yeah,
And
and
but
each
but
one
wouldn't
wanted a
we?
reset. Every single one of them then sort of reset with Russia, rather than as Erdogan did, is well, we'll have a relationship, but it's based on you
Erdogan, yes.
slap us, we'll slap you right back, right? We define the rules of this relationship rather than endlessly seeking a reset or projecting our values onto you. And I think history will also show that Biden, through his intermediaries, signaled to Russia that, you know, if you invade Ukraine full scale, we're not going to go nuclear. We're not going to. It wasn't defined as what we will do to deter you. It was defined as, well, what we're not going to do. We were already self deterring at that point, giving a big kind of green light. But again, you can say that Europe and the purchase of Russian hydrocarbons, Nord Stream 2 proceeding with that, even in the face of full scale aggression, Trump loves to point out that he called that out as being ludicrous hypocrisy and weakness, and on that point he is correct. Whether he would have done anything different, who knows? But we've had successive administrations done that. Where it has led us to, I think, is a consistent policy in the US and Europe, and that is reactive deterrence. Russia does something, it maintains what's called the escalation dominance. We react in an entirely predictable way. We do what we think are bold and strong moves. Russia takes everything we do as weakness because it's predictable and because it's reactive. At no point have we done something where they've gone, whoa, hang on a second. Well, we weren't expecting that, right? That's imposed a real cost on us. No, we continue to be entirely predictable to the point now where we have drones. And I mentioned this a few weeks ago. I've mentioned it on the channel that something like this is bound to happen. And once we had the drone incursion in Poland, I speculated that, well, soon we will see this on a mass scale and near daily. And in fact, we've been seeing sort of various grey zone incursions happening every couple of weeks anyway. It's just not been reported upon. At this point, as a speaker I had on the channel said today, we are at war with Russia. We are at
Look,
war with Russia.
Jonathan, I think that you're absolutely right that Donald Trump made it very clear that he is not going to be part of this war with Russia, and therefore that means that any conversation about, oh, this is bringing World War III closer in, are moot, because we know this America, that this administration will not fight Russia. Therefore, I guess everybody else can fight Russia.
Well, World War III is here and the US is out. I think that was the message actually we heard in the UN. Out for now. Of course, the question comes: what
Well, it's
happens
because you're
when
all going to
Taiwan
hell,
gets
It's
well? What
it's
happens
because you're
when
all going to
Taiwan
hell.
gets rolled over? I mean, that surely Taiwan would be a red line for many in the Republican Party. Many would say, "Hang on a second, we have to react."
Well, and that's another reason why this tweet from Trump is important and is very positive, because it does give all the Republicans who were understanding that this is a problem with Putin, that we're letting him walk all over us and showing nothing but weakness, that it gives them kind of a cover. It makes me think of how in Soviet Union you could say anything if you could find Mark's quote for it. So now Republicans have a Trump quote that says, Russia is a paper tiger. Yes, to the battle, now to the Capitol Hill. Let's pass something. Of course, Trump will never put new sanctions on Russia, but it continues to give politicians cover to do their thing. And Wall Street Journal literally came out with an editorial the other day urging Republicans to actually put pressure on the president instead of just saying, well, he'll never sign it, so what's the point of voting for it? So there is some kind of a movement within. But in the end, Trump really just holds the Republican Party by its neck. And so in this situation, yes, no action, no aggression. We're just now like a corner store. We're like a convenience shop. We're not United States. It. I just watched Trump go from. There's been a lot of discussions about whether the U.S. is a world policeman, or whether we're done with that, or whether we're like ally or what. But it turned out that you can be a policeman, or you can be a gangster, and you can be like the world gangster, because now you got the biggest gun in the world. Everyone, you're in charge of their safety. And so this is a really amazing opportunity for a gangster. And what Trump doesn't realize is that when he destroys this Pax Americana, and because he shows up now as a gangster, nobody needs him. He's not necessary in this equation, because now they just have to deal with Russia. He's not helping. All right, goodbye. And so yes, he can be supplying weapons. Yes, it's important to keep him from going openly, moving in with Putin entirely. This is that period where Trump has moved out, away from like democracy and like freedom, but he hasn't moved in with the fascists entirely quite yet. So he's like living on his own right now. He's showing his independence. We'll see how long that lasts.
I mean, if you strip away the narrative, and it's amazing how many people celebrate the narrative change as if that is the entirety of it, whereas it's the policy and the action change that is the significant thing we should watch out for. But this still has the character of an extortion racket, right? You've got this psychopath, right? Europe,
That's
and
all
especially
he
Ukraine.
understands. It's
Yeah, I mean,
it's an extortion racket, or like this just doesn't make sense.
it doesn't make sense. But if Russia's, aggressive and maybe it doesn't have much to offer us because it can't even fill people's cars with gasoline, okay, we're not going to make much money from there. But it's still a useful bogeyman, and it's still actually, literally dangerous in real life. Well, this is great because these European guys do have lots of money, and now they need all these weapons. Well, this is quite a handy little kind of extortion scenario here. So of course, you don't want to be mean to the guys who need your weapons, who are going to be
But the
buying them.
question is, Jonathan, does it work? Because if your protection racket doesn't protect you, then what the heck is the point of paying for the racket? Because if it's just like, then am I here just to pay money?
Yeah. Yeah, in a word, yes. All of this smells a little bit like the old Danegeld of the sort of Dark Age times. You pay the bad guys to go away if you don't want to fight. Well, Ukraine doesn't have the money to pay the bad guy. It's the bad guy has all the money, so they're fighting and winning. I mean, how many commentators I've seen this last week say, even now, Ukraine is losing. I had several commentators who called themselves pro-Ukraine, etc., but haven't been following in detail. And they say, well, they're brave and they're putting up a sterling effort, but of course Ukraine is losing. It's a classic kind of journalistic trope. You throw in this phrase without any analysis, without any evidence, as if it's an absolute truism that is incontestable.
Is a desire to show your balanced view?
I mean, these people would think they're being balanced by saying that, whereas it is the absolute opposite of balance. You know, it's ejecting an extreme opinion from no data into the equation. That's why I've grown to have infinite respect for certain journalists and absolute contempt for others during the course of this full-scale war. I mean, those who think and those who inhabit the world of facts and rationality stand out a mile from those that speak in cliched narratives. And
Well, I would like to. I think that we could always open up like a media critique feature on our podcast. But I found myself listening a lot lately, as a lot of people have, to Michael Wolff on Daily Beast podcast, because to me, understanding what Trump is thinking about and what mood he might be in, but almost based on what he ate more than what policies good for national defense of the United States, it seems more relevant right now. And so it seems like that's the direction, because we're now like in an age of palace intrigue. So
I like
whoever is
Scaramucci and Mary Trump also, two really kind of interesting voices who talk from, having direct experience of his, let's say, thought patterns. Trumpology, as it's become, like criminology.
But at the same time, how do you feel? And people can certainly weigh in the comments. And that's what I wonder myself all the time as a mass communication person as well. To what extent we reevaluate how we view somebody like Anthony Scaramucci or Mary Trump, because the election is over. He won. Now they're in this position versus that position. How valuable is their insight to us now? And I look at it when I see people who are protesting Putin in Russia versus how they're viewed when they're outside of Russia protesting Putin, and that whole kind of a personal credibility for the people. But Michael Wolff, just to bring him back, because he seems to be the man of the moment in just terms of views. I think that being a biographer of Jeffrey Epstein and essentially Donald Trump is it seems like a still relevant experience. Although, to be honest, if there's no consequences for Trump for all of the stuff that he's done, it really ends up just kind of normalizing all the terrible things that he's done. So I'm really kind of hoping this is going to have a happy end here.
Well, if it doesn't lead to anything, but I still think he's interesting, especially Michael Wolff, who has, I would say, that people will often ask him questions that are driven by their sort of, their left or center biases, and he'll say, actually, no, that's not my experience, and he'll give hopefully something which is from real life. But he's also there in the business of selling books, and I think this is the trouble. All those who are in Trump's inner circle have now become pundits. Well, we got to think of the algorithm. The algorithm is going to push you to being divisive, to saying shocking things, to sort of, and there's a certain tendency that all these people, no matter how smart they are all engaged in a certain kind of grift. They're all engaged in, selling airtime based on saying inflammatory things that may or not be true, but certain emphasis may be changed in order to feed the algorithm. And they are all profiting from their proximity to Trump, whether, what they say is 100% true or not. Michael Cohen, another classic example there. Someone who spent probably more time with Trump than anybody else on earth. It's absolutely fascinating listening to him, but you have to have, I guess, a certain sort of slight kind of cynicism. It's interesting, though, that there are so many people who've come into Trump's orbit, and that we get these varied stories, and you patch them together, and you get quite an interesting picture. We do not have the same for Putin. We think we kind of know who Putin is, but there are so few sources of anybody who are prepared or are living who can leak any kind of details of that texture of life around Putin or his decision-making process. That
You know,
looks like
that's
a
very interesting because that
closed box.
takes me back to our conversation with Mark Fagan when I asked him, "What do you think, is Trump doing a good job being like Putin?" Because he wants to be like Putin when he grows up, clearly. And Mark said, "No, he's not, because Putin would not be acting this way." And you're saying kind of the same thing, which is like, we know nothing about Putin, which
Yeah.
means we know, well, everything about Trump, which means that Trump is doing a pretty bad job of being a Putin.
Yes, he's doing a terrible, Putin impersonator impression. I mean, he's going through the motions. You've got the purge of satirists, which exactly figures, what happened to Kukli, Viktor Senjorovich and NTV. So we're going through the motions, as it were, and you say we're cycling through them faster. You're going to have certain oligarchs. Well, the oligarchs are, ironically, there really is no kind of Khodorkovsky figure, and they've all bowed down in advance so they can hold on to their grubby fortunes and empires.
We'll
Um,
see, because now Trump wants to put Soros and his son in jail. So we'll
Ah,
see how,
well, yeah.
how that goes.
And Comey announced today. So again, the persecution of opponents, that is proceeding apace. We had the raid on John Bolton. We've had Comey now is being prosecuted, and I'm not sure what for. But again, it's the exact kind of playbook, whether it be the 1930s or the 1990s. It's following a certain formula, and it's following it almost to the letter. So we should be tracking forward as to what comes next. But I don't know how consciously Trump is doing this, or whether it comes instinctively to him, or whether he's being guided by those who are more ideological and are holding the details of the plan, and they're just, sticking the stuff in front of him, saying, "Okay, well, next we're going to do this," and he's like, "Cool." I don't know really who's pulling the strings, although I expect, that Miller character. Has something to do with it. I saw a nice meme today where it had his head, grafted onto one of those monsters from Alien with a sucker in it. It was very well done. But he's vile and evil, and I can see him having the, let's say, the strategic tenacity to follow through such a despicable plan. But none of this leads to a good place. Having said that, Putin managed to keep his hybrid autocracy going for a considerable period of time, during which actually many Russians in the large cities, um, life expectancy increased and average wealth increased. And obviously, the oil price was going up at that time. But up until 2012, you could say that there's a certain bargain with the people. That actually he was able to deliver a certain stability and economic growth
I
in
just presume that
return.
it's presume it's better quality alcohol.
Yes, or in return for their compliance. Now, if you look at the death statistics, there's a dramatic change from the early 2000s through to 2012. There's a genuine economic miracle, not miracle. There's a definite genuine economic improvement, but of course, very much concentrated in the larger cities. I think the provinces were always going the other way. Um, and certainly pictures I've seen of certain towns in the 2000s, late 2000, after 2012, 2020s, a lot worse than they even appeared in the 1990s. But certainly in the large cities, you have this extraordinary sort of Potemkin facade, as it were, of luxury and improvement. It's quite possible that if Trump could keep the economy going, he could pull off the same trick, which is a deep and serious authoritarian slide, while maintaining enough wealth for enough people, that they are certainly willing to be compliant to keep that going, and surrender a whole host of freedoms. Having said that, he doesn't seem to particularly competent on the economy. So I again, that's where he diverges from Putin. Putin did have economics experts, the so-called sort of liberal reformers, some of whom were kept on side, and certainly certain rational economic policies were followed. I'm not sure you can actually make that comparison with what Trump is up to.
I think that what I'm seeing with this administration is that since they are so expertly failing at everything, and they're not even able to provide people with some modicum of, economic prosperity, they are concentrating on killing the messenger. which means attacking media, attacking comedians, because it's not Trump failing bad jokes. Oh, okay. And I think that there is one country that seems to clearly aware of where this is headed: Poland. So I think there's been really interesting to watch this, particularly this past week at the UN. Stanislav Sikorski of Poland making a very articulate case over and over about the importance of helping Ukraine and about Russian threat. And to me, this just, I think, it kind of opens up a theme that we'll perhaps discuss in future podcasts about the changing security architecture of this world, where instead of having the United States be security anchor, perhaps in my mind, and if we can argue about this going on, I feel like Ukraine is becoming the security anchor now, security blanket for Europe. And so now, instead of saying just leave Ukraine behind, concentrate on good old Donald, I think Europe is starting to see that their security and safety in the future starts and begins and ends with Ukraine. So we'll see where that
Absolutely.
goes.
This is an idea I floated in 2022, that the orbit of security, or the center of gravity of security, was shifting towards Poland, the Baltics, Nordics, and especially Ukraine. And that partially explained, let's say in 2022, why France and Germany were so slow in reacting. You don't want to see that orbit, that center of gravity of Europe, moving beyond. At that point, we couldn't have predicted that the US would be out of the game as well. But no, I think you're right. Ukraine is the rock, rock that refuses to be submerged by the tide of authoritarianism.
Jonathan, thank you so much to you. Thanks to everyone who joined us this week. If you're looking for thoughtful analysis, then and you like the Silicon Valley, Silicon Valley, it's a different channel. It's also the Silicon Curtain for a few years. Then you have been experiencing good, solid analysis for a few years, and you can't say, "Oh, I'm so surprised by what's happening." As similarly, listeners and viewers of Rashkin Report, who know that we've been critical with guests, and I myself and my guests have been speaking of the danger of Donald Trump for at least 10 years since the channel was launched, because that kind of seemed like the topic was obvious then. So if you've been subscribed for a long time, congratulations. If you're just subscribing today, thank you. Hit like, subscribe, press that darn bell, and we'll see you soon. Jonathan, thank you so much.
Yuri, thank you.
Take care.